Alright, we're back this time with James Cameron's much beloved sequel to Alien, and of who I might add can really be considered a master craftsman of the sequel format, having delivered stellar sequels both to the Alien franchise series as well as that to the Terminator franchise. And it's no small feat replicating this success twice, as others have tried and failed, most notably perhaps Irvin Kershner and his attempt to revitalize the sequel format as he has done before with The Empire Strikes Back, this time in the guise of the sequel to 1987's RoboCop directed by Paul Verhoeven. Anyway, getting back to James Cameron, one can easily place Cameron emerging from the same cinematic upbringing which had enveloped both Spielberg as well as that of George Lucas. These directors have often been placed alongside other names such as Scorsese, Coppola, and Friedkin, of who can really be taken to comprise much more of an auteur-based independent streak of cinema, saturating the landscape of the 70s movie-making experience. I claim, however, that we can make some sort of demarcation here between that of Coppola, Scorsese, Friedkin in one camp and Cameron, Spielberg, and Lucas in the other. The former here being aligned with what I would claim is a much more quote-unquote serious weightiness of films fixation, often prioritizing internationally critically acclaimed film pieces stemming from a broad range of directors, and having a film palette much more sensitized to art films in general. That is not to say that these critical films were not also taken in by the second group, where we could reference, for instance, the masterpiece film of 1968, namely 2001: Space Odyssey, which had a lasting impact particularly on Spielberg and Cameron respectively. However, what creates a separation, in my opinion, is the allusion to special effects, which would so infuse the filmography of the directors in the later years. One might be forgiven here also to question the placement of Spielberg in this category, as he is very much in associations with films with a more serious bent, such as War Horse or Schindler's List. However, the overarching emphasis placement of special effects and other technical gadgetry in filmmaking makes for the inclusion in this group. Thus, in a real sense, to know Cameron, Spielberg, and Lucas is to know the works whose hands were touched by the special effects wizardry comprising that of Ray Harryhausen, along with other pioneers of the sci-fi genre, be it in the form of critically acclaimed films such as Metropolis and The Day the Earth Stood Still, or lesser-known B-movies such as Flash Gordon's Trip to Mars. This same upbringing of a science fiction-induced nutritional diet of special effects cinematic encapsulation would also inspire future filmmakers such as Michael Bay. One might say of Michael Bay, who although possesses less considerable talent than the former group, nonetheless managed to capitalize on the creation of a behemoth budget science fiction franchise through the realization of the Transformers series of films. The meaning thus of this introduction is to place James Cameron in the entourage of filmmakers whose output is that of the creation of big budgetary immersive landscapes realized through placing a special emphasis on cutting-edge technology and special effects wizardry in order to facilitate their own creative vision. One may then in addition place the background of this creative vision with that of older science fiction movies in conjunction with the pushing of boundaries done by the filmmakers and additional crew who put their fingerprint, as it were, on these types of films. Now, with that out of the way, let's start by beginning to look at Aliens. We are witness to, in the opening shots, the same slow, deliberate manipulation of time unfolding as that of its predecessor film, although this time with the addition of a tint of blue making its way across space for us viewers. We also note that instead of being brought into isolation, as it were, with the Nostromo vessel following the opening sequence of Alien, we are here instead witnessing the escape shuttle being brought towards us as audience members, signifying the possibility, in some sense, of starting from scratch, as it were, in another unoccupied bubble of space and time without the primal wrecking comprising that of the xenomorph creatures. However, as we will later witness, it is through human beings' own sense of hubris that will ultimately tempt them again to gain confidence in their flawed ability to manipulate their unknown surroundings through the aid of Father Science. Getting back to the escape shuttle, we note that its name, Narcissus, ascribed to the shuttle, can be directly tied to that of Greek mythology, relating the famed story of the young man Narcissus, who became obsessed with his own image after seeing his own reflection in a pool of water through traversing the woods. He would eventually become so transfixed by his own image that he chose not to eat or drink, leading eventually to his own decay by the poolside. The escape ship can thus be seen in symbolic light to that of symbolizing an excessive commitment of pride and self-love, which in the franchise is explored in virtually every entry. The interpretation here being that Homo sapiens are seen placing too much confidence in their ability to navigate the inhospitable surroundings, be it in the form of the barren dead space wasteland of their surroundings, or in the female reptilian goddess comprising the xenomorph creatures. Note also here in the opening sequence, which should be superficially obvious to anyone having watched the first film, the continuation of style which is kept from the first film. This, I claim, is one of the most important selling points regarding the film, as it means the success in recreating the same immersiveness of environment as the film Alien from 1979 managed to convey. Moreover, this immersiveness is not so much from the vantage point of the viewers themselves, but rather intended for the lead character of Ellen Ripley. As we will see, Ripley will eventually be able to relate a sense of connectivity to the present time frame, which is transpiring 57 years after her time inside the nesting cocoon of the escape shuttle, securing her own stasis. This will again relate directly to one of the major themes of this film, which is that of camaraderie and social cohesion, masked upon initial viewing as that of a more superficial to some action film. There are also additional themes in the film, such as feminism, motherhood, masculinity, and human ontology, which we will explore throughout these series of films. Much like 1999's The Matrix, then, Aliens harbors deeper themes which are not immediately present on the surface level. We could also comment upon here the breakage of this surrounding immersion symmetry in the fourth entry known as Alien Resurrection from 1997, where Ripley, clone or not, has completely lost all her chances of being aligned with the future surroundings for which she now finds herself in. Again, this constitutes an important theme in the fourth entry of films. Lastly, this Hollywood manufacturing of film landscapes of the scale seen in Aliens obviously requires a large budgetary input in general, which gives some credence to the blockbuster genre of films, contingent upon the fact that it creates a satisfactory artistic output on all ends of filmmaking. Getting back to the film, the scene where Ripley is seen excavated, as it were, from her stasis on board Narcissus mimics the initial response to the derelict distress call, only this time there seemingly is no menacingly orchestrated backplot involving a rogue synthetic known as Ash. Rather, Ripley has both survived against all odds against the monstrous creature, as well as successfully escaping at all odds, be it nearly 60 years into the future. She will also serve the role of having foresight into future events, which we will later explore throughout the film as to when the events are seen to be transpiring. There is also a nice play on the audience viewer here, as we are also in full cognition of the fact that things are definitely going to end up horribly in any encounter scenario with the xenomorphs, having already witnessed the full breadth of havoc in the first entry. In any case, following Ripley's recovery, we are here introduced to the character known as Burke, a junior executive who will serve the function as an avatar representing the ruthless, profit-seeking arm of the Yutani Corporation throughout the film. We note here in their rather amusing first encounter that Burke is seen giving Ripley back her furry friend, Jones, as in keeping in line with the old adage of beware of the Greeks bearing gifts. We will thus witness later in the film, very much keeping in line with his initial presentation, that an initial first encounter of charity could very well be used as masking that of a hidden destructive agenda. Jones, on the other hand, the irresistible furry cuddleball, will here serve as an additional purpose in this film, which he did not serve in the previous film, namely that of securing acquaintance within a new time frame. Cats, which have traditionally represented, among other things, domesticity, will help Ripley reacquaint herself with her initial foreign surroundings, and by the end of the film, we will see her making the transition to a fully fledged citizen of this new time period. Jones also helps to sell the progression of normalcy of the scene, as it is gradually revealed that we are in fact dealing with a nightmare unfolding from the point of view of Ripley. Some have remarked here the paradoxical nature of this scene, as it is in this nightmare and only here that we are presented with the fact that Ripley has been in a stasis for the last 57 years. Personally, I don't find this much of a plot hole, as it is reasonable to conjecture that Ripley might have learned the information in a similar event, minus the chestburster scene, setting up the wolf in disguise confidant role essentially of Burke early on in the film. We might again see this as an intelligent move in terms of narrative development in the film early on. In addition, it's really clever how, if one did not have any expectations as to the nature of the theme of Aliens, all that has been presented thus far could be taken as presenting the same horror-esque feel which enveloped the first film. One can also interpret the scene as relaying the fact that although Ripley is suffering from a sense of PTSD following her own trauma, she will embody the same sense of confidence, competence, resilience, and strength throughout the development of the narration as the movie progresses. Lastly, there is also a deeper thematic in this scene relating the chestburster portion of the nightmare scene in question in terms of the transcendent potentiality of science itself to control the reproduction phase traditionally ascribed to the woman, through the wish of foreign actors to take control of the xenomorph creature, and through it the manipulation of the birth cycle. For what would immediately happen to the chestburster following a monitored situation of Ripley? Surely the greedy hands of the Yutani Corporation would once again initialize a cycle of profit-gear exploitation of the creature at hand, and seek to clinically control the birth, life, and death cycle of the xenomorph. This can again be related to a larger theme of reproductive ethics that is conveyed in multiple entries of the franchise. In any case, this is something I have alluded to in previous Alien videos. If you are interested, go watch it. And it is something that will come up again once I tackle the fourth entry of the series. Now, getting back to the film, following Ripley learning of the death of her own daughter, which is again mediated through the cunning deliverance of Burke, we see her engaged in a judicial dispute of sorts in which her narration of her own events are being brought into question. We might conjecture here that if it were not for the fact that there were colonies, including families on the planet known as LV-246, Ripley might be a lot more amenable to having her license suspended indefinitely, as well as undergoing psychometric evaluation without hesitation. Having recently learned of her own daughter's death, this might very well be the overarching motivation for getting herself involved in the investigation of the lost colonists. but thus does not mimic the strong motivation or drive of the maternal instinct, which is also so prevalent in the alien queen herself, which Ripley will have to encounter later in the film. This comment may then be taken in relation to asking in terms of human ontology whether Homo sapiens themselves are fundamentally different to that of animals, or if they are merely another species, a species more evolved in terms of cognitive ability and complex emotional development. So I guess one theory in relation to emotions would be that of essentially concentric circles expanding, where we have this core emotions in the center, like the anger and sadness, happiness, and then more complex emotions as we expand in our concentric circles. And that might be one way to relate emotions in terms of animals and human beings. It's also important to talk about sort of the evolutionary baggage both of humans and animals, and well, humans are animals, and a lot of these evolutionary traits have been associated historically with that of the limbic system, for instance, the amygdala in terms of inducing fear. But I know in terms of modern neuroscience, there's been a lot of pushback in terms of relegating functions to specific areas in the brain, so we might have to be careful in terms of the interpretations there. It's also interesting if we really need to go back to our evolutionary traits in terms of understanding our contemporary emotions, or if it's enough to have an analysis at the contemporary level. There are scientists such as Adolphs and Anderson, I believe, who claim that we need to have a sort of evolutionary basis in terms of understanding our emotions in present day. We might also talk about the interpretations of emotions, like we might see emotions in terms of functional states located in an environment, and then our response to that stimulus. Or we might argue, for instance, as others have, like the philosopher and psychologist William James, really an early philosopher and psychologist from the 19th century, who argued that emotions should be understood in terms of physiological states. That is, we might imagine like we are scared of a bear or something, or some other fear-inducing event, and the body produces these physiological responses to that stimuli. Like we might, for instance, imagine us sweating or being overcome by a pulsating heartbeat. And then the interpretations of emotions is essentially reversed in a way. We are running away from the bear in question, and then we are reacting in a way in terms of fear because of our physiological responses to the event. So that's a more radical approach, one might say. And relating back to the xenomorphs, we do see, both in terms of development of emotions and in terms of cognitive ability, that there is some substance to it. I mean, we do see the xenomorphs evading attack and really having quite complex planning patterns in terms of attacking their prey, moving very silently through the air ducts, for instance. Or there is some sort of operational conditioning, very Skinner-esque in the Alien Resurrection films as well, where they are adapting to the situation and really adapting to the torture, pain avoidance in a particular scene. Returning to the film, as Ripley ponders whether to go through with the rescue mission, we see that she has been busying herself with what is perceived as in this future, as well as our present, as that of a lower class job in terms of a cargo loader involving forklifts. There is a rather striking return to this mechanical contraption of the forklift machinery in the very end scenes, which we will discuss in more detail later, but it is worth pointing out already that in order to beat the reptilian goddess mother of the xenomorph queen, Ripley will have to replace her outer layer, as it were, with that of a mechanical exoskeleton, using the ever malleable and adaptive resources concerning that of science. Also, to wrap up this first video, following Ripley's once again stressful flashbacks in the shower scene, we might also conjecture at this point that part of her motivation for making a return to the ill-fated planet is tied up with her own desire of overcoming her own fears through the use of psychological gradual exposure to this very same stress event. If you have any comments or suggestions, please let me know, and I'll be back next week for the next entry.